I am here with Dr. Natasha. I am so excited to have her with me. We're going to be spending a few minutes talking about what we went over in her interview for my upcoming summit, The Biology of Trauma. And Dr. Natasha, you are a very experienced practitioner, also here because of your personal experience and your own personal health journey. And we are talking about highly sensitive people, those empaths, and those of us, many of us, who would fall into that category, would describe ourselves as being highly sensitive, very sensitive to other people's emotions and energies. And this is what we talk about on your interview. So I would love for you to just give a brief story of your own personal journey and why this is such an important topic for you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dr. Amy. I had a really great chat with you on this summit that's coming up, the Biology of Trauma. And I think we really connect on a lot of the ways that we see trauma. I grew up always feeling really sensitive to my environment. And as I got older, that meant sensitive to body sensations, sensitive to pain, sensitive to emotions, people around me, and then food sensitivities, environmental sensitivities. So it was really this common theme throughout my life that I realized it really was impacting my health, both mentally, physically, biochemically. And what I also found was that people like myself were more likely to experience a lot of trauma just because we're picking up on a lot in our environment. So, there's big T trauma, little t trauma, and just a lot of different ways of looking at it. But really, for me, fundamentally, trauma is overwhelm. It's overwhelm that you can't process and integrate. So that really was a big part of why growing up as a really highly sensitive person, things were really more traumatic to me than maybe were for people who weren't as sensitive as me. And then that led to this whole interlinking web of health issues and all of that.
Yes.
So that was my story when I sort of figured that out. I studied a lot of somatic things, biochemistry, neurology, immunology, all of that. But I realized the emotional component of processing trauma was one of the most biggest missing pieces in healthcare for people.
Absolutely. I think that we have misunderstood the impact, the value of that emotional stuff on our physical health, right? And so we come into our providers and we're struggling with fatigue, we're struggling with autoimmune processes, gut issues, inflammation, pain, whatever it is. And there's this big piece of stored trauma, and especially the emotional sensitivity that is missing a lot of times when we're addressing physical health.
Right.
It was so important for me to have you come on and talk about this because I know that many people relate to being an empath, right? And not understanding that emotional sensitivity often has chemical sensitivities, also has these vulnerabilities in their biology that are leverage points that they can actually improve that emotional sensitivity for them. I remember growing up that I was brought up in a very conservative religious home. And so we would have these baptisms. And I remember like every baptism, and I would be in the back bawling my eyes out as a little girl. And people would ask me like, why are you crying? This is, something happy. And I'd be like, I have no idea why I'm crying. I can't stop it. I can't control it. This is me and my system. And it's like it's been a process of learning like, and not only does that represent some of my biology stuff that I can work on, but it also does lend itself to experiencing other situations in life as traumatic, as overwhelming, whereas other people might just experience them as a stress. So I know in our talk, we talked about the different categories of sensitivity. You mentioned those briefly. You want to mention those briefly again for people so that they can know what your interview will specifically be on in this summit.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. A lot of people don't realize that they're empaths or sensitive. But there's emotional sensitivity. And I actually define that separately as mental sensitivity. And, I talk about the distinctions of that. And then there's physical sensitivity, biochemical, social, and also kind of energetic sensitivity. So all these different ways that people, sometimes people like across the board have sensitivity to a lot of those things. But other times it's more just a really specific thing. Like a mental sensitivity is somebody who's really good at picking up on pattern recognition or realizing when something's out of place or kind of that error detection system in our anterior cingulate gyrus. And those types of sensitivities are maybe different than an emotional or like a social sensitivity where you pick up on people's emotions or needs around you. Sometimes people have more than one of those, but there's a lot of different ways of understanding how you can be empathic or a sensitive person.
Yep.
And then, I go by the sensitive doctor because it's really about finding those sensitivities in yourself and really starting to understand that they are a superpower of yours. They're a strength,
Yes,
not
exactly.
a flaw or a weakness. So that was really, I think, what we focused on talking about was understanding how to turn all of that into a superpower.
Yes. Yes. Because like you say, for many people, it's just been something that's been overwhelming in their life. They want to shut it off. They want to turn it off completely. They don't like that part of themselves. And yet realizing that when we can learn to manage it, when we can learn to bring the intensity down, it can actually be quite a useful guide for us and doesn't need to be overwhelming and something that we hate. So
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have your interview air on the summit and really encouraging people to listen to your talk if they relate at all to being an empath, a sensitive person, to anything, right? Because there's all these different categories. Many people will pick up on one category more than another, but like you say, there's many people who kind of have that overall sensitivity across all spectrums.
Right. Yeah, I'm really excited. So tune in to the Biology of the Biology of Trauma Summit. And I look forward to connecting with all of you. Thank you so much, Dr. Amy, for doing this really important work.
Thank you, Natasha. Love how you're showing up in the work that you're doing with helping, especially professionals who are empaths, because we need it. We need that help.